Hello again. I don't know if you actually could be turning this into audio. You're not even going to see me wave at you, but I'm waving. Okay. So this will be part 2. And I will resume from, I think, slightly before where I left off last time. So here we go. We could go in there once or twice a year with a load of our very best, held back from our usual buyers. Not a lot, but the finest quality. And that's what we would ask in return. Confidentiality. Only you and I would need to know. Brashen nodded, more to himself than Finney. Yes, the man was planning on going behind his partner's back to make a bit more money for himself. So much honour among thieves. He was quietly offering to cut Brashen in on the deal if Brashen would help him find the sources. It was a low trick. How could Finney look at him and believe he was that sort of man? How long could he pretend he was not? What was the point of it anymore? Well, think about it, Brashen told him. You do that. Finney grinned. In the late afternoon, Wintrow crouched on the foredeck beside Kennett. Ease him off the blanket, he directed the men who had borne him there. I wanted to be lying on the planking of the deck with as little between him and the wizard wood as possible. A short distance away, her arms crossed on her chest, Etta stood, apparently impassive. She would not look towards Vivacia. Wintrow tried not to stare at the pirate woman. He wondered if anyone else noticed her clenched fists and tight jaw. She had battled his decision to do the cutting here. She had wanted privacy and walls around this messy, painful business. Wintrow had brought her here and showed her his own bloody handprint on the deck. He had promised her that Vivacia could help Kennett with the pain as she had helped him when his finger was cut off. Etta had finally given in to his will. Neither he nor Vivacia were certain how much help the ship could give, but as they still lacked the medicine chest, anything she could do for Kennett would be helpful. The ship was anchored in a nameless cove of an uncharted island. Wintrow had gone to Brig to ask once more about both where the medicine chest was and when they would get to Bull Creek. Both answers had been disappointing. The medical supplies had not been found, and without the Marietta to guide him, Brig did not know how to get back to Bull Creek. The answer had disheartened Wintrow, but not shocked him. Brig's temporary command of the Vivacia was a giant step up for him. Only a few days ago, Brig had been a common seaman. He didn't know how to navigate or read charts. He intended to find a safe place to anchor up and wait until either the Marietta found them or Kennett was well enough to guide him. When Wintrow had asked incredulously if they were completely lost, Brig had replied that a man could know where he was and still not know a safe course to somewhere else. The crisp anger in the young sailor's voice had warned Wintrow to hold his tongue. There was no sense in letting the former slaves know of their situation. It presented too great an opportunity for Saradar. Even now the wandering priest hovered at the edge of the group. He had not offered to be helpful, and Wintrow had not asked him. Most often wandering priests were judges and negotiators rather than healers or scholars. While Wintrow had always respected their learning, and even the wisdom of that order, he had never been completely comfortable with the right of any man to judge another. It did not help right now to feel that scrutiny was being applied to him. Whenever he sensed Saradar gaze at him, he felt a chill knowledge that the man found him unworthy. The older priest stood, arms crossed on his chest. 2 map faces flanked him. He spoke to them quietly. Wintrow pushed aside his awareness of them. If Saradar would not help, Wintrow would not be distracted by him. He rose and walked to the bow of the ship. Vivacia looked back at him anxiously. I will do my best, she said, before Wintrow could ask, but keep in mind we have no blood bond with him. He is not kin to us, nor has he been aboard long enough for me to be familiar with him. She lowered her eyes. I will not be much help to you. Wintrow leaned far down to touch his palm to hers. Lend your strength to me then, and that will do much, he consoled her. Their hands met, confirming and increasing the strange bond between them. He did draw strength from her. As he acknowledged that, he saw an answering smile dawn on her face. It was not an expression of happiness, not even a sign that all was now right between them. with a sign of shared determination. Whatever else might threaten them, whatever doubts they harboured about one another, they still went into this together. Winthrop lifted his face to the sea wind and offered up a prayer that Sar might guide them. He turned back to his task. As he drew a deep breath, he could feel Vivacia with him. Kenneth lay limply on the deck. Even at this distance, Winthrop could smell the brandy. Etta had sat beside Kenneth and patiently coaxed him to drink far beyond his desire. The man had a good capacity for alcohol. He was sodden, but not senseless. Etta had also been the one to choose who would hold him down. To Wintrop's surprise, 3 of those she had chosen were former slaves. One was even an older map face. They looked uneasy but determined as they stood among the gawking onlookers. That would be the first thing Winthrop would deal with. He spoke calmly but clearly. Only those who have been summoned should be here. The rest of you disperse to give me room. He did not wait to see if they obeyed him. To watch them ignore his command would only be an additional humiliation for him. He was sure that if they did, Etta would intervene. He knelt down beside Kenneth. It would be awkward to work with him lying flat on the deck, but Winthrop felt that whatever strength Vivacia could lend him would be worth it. He looked over the paltry array of tools he had scavenged. They lay in a tidy row on a piece of clean canvas next to his patient. It was a motley assortment of makeshift equipment. The knives, freshly sharpened, had come from the cook's supplies. There were 2 saws from the carpenter's box. There were sail-making needles, large and coarse, and some sewing needles that belonged to Etta. Etta had provided him with neatly torn bandaging, both linen and silk. It was ridiculous that he had not been able to salvage better equipment. Almost every sailor aboard had his own needles and tools. All the belongings of the slaughtered crewmen had disappeared. He was sure the slaves had claimed them when they took over the ship. That none of them had been surrendered to this need spoke deeply of how much the former slaves resented Kenneth's claiming of the ship. Winthrop could understand their feelings, but it did not help his predicament. As he looked down on the crew's tools, he knew he was doomed to fail. This would be little better than lopping the man's leg off with an axe. He lifted his eyes and sought out Etta. I must have better tools than these, he asserted quietly. I dare not begin without them. She had been musing, her gaze and thoughts afar. I wish we had the kit from aboard the Marietta, she replied wistfully. For that unguarded moment, she looked almost young. She reached down to twine one of Kenneth's black curls with her fingers. The sudden tenderness in her face as she looked on the drowsing man was startling. I wish we had Vivacia's medicine chest, Winthrop replied solemnly. It was kept in the mate's cabin before this began. There was much in it that would be useful, with medicines and tools. It could have made this much easier for him. No one seems to know what became of it. Etta's gaze darkened, and her face hardened into a scowl. No one? She asked coldly. Someone always knows something. You just have to ask the right way. She stood abruptly. As she crossed the deck, she drew her knife from its hip sheath. Winthrop immediately discerned her target. Saradar and his 2 guards had withdrawn but not left the foredeck. Too late, the wandering priest turned to acknowledge Etta's approach. His gaze of disdain became a goggle of shock as Etta casually ran the honed edge of her blade down his chest. He stumbled back with a shout, then looked down at the front of his ragged shirt hanging open. A thin line down his hairy chest became red and widened as the blood began to seep. His 2 burly guards looked down at Etta's knife held low and ready. Brigg and another pirate had already closed ranks for her. For an instant, no one spoke or moved. Winthrop could almost hear Saradar assessing his choices. The wound was a shallow scoring of his skin, very painful but not life-threatening. She could have gutted him where he stood. So, what did she want? He chose wronged righteousness. Why? He demanded theatrically. He opened his arms wide to expose a slash down his chest. He half turned, so that he addressed the slaves, still clustered amidships as well as Etta. Why do you choose to attack? What have I done? Except come forward to offer my aid. I want the ship's medicine chest. Etta responded. I want it now. I don't have it, Sardar exclaimed angrily. The woman moved faster than a clawing cat. Her knife licked out, and a second line of blood bisected the first. Sardar set his teeth and did not cry out or step back, but Winter saw the effort it cost him. Find it, Etta suggested. You bragged that you organized the uprising that overthrew the captain. You go among the slaves, exulting that you are the true leader they should follow. If that is true, you should know which of your men plundered the mate's cabin. They took the chest. I want it. Now. For a breath longer, the tableau held. Did some sort of a sign, a flicker of a glance, pass between Sardar and his men? Wintrow could not be certain, but Sardar began talking, but to Wintrow his words seemed oddly staged. You could have simply asked me, you know. I am a humble man, a priest of Sar. I seek nothing for myself, only the greater good of humanity. This chest you seek. What did it look like? His querying eyes fell on Wintrow, and his mouth stretched in a manufactured smile. Wintrow forced himself to keep a neutral expression as he answered. A wooden chest, so by so. Wintrow measured it in the air. Locked. Vivacious image was burned into the top of it. Within were medicines, doctoring tools, needles, bandaging. Anyone who opened it would know instantly what it was. Sardar turned to those gathered in the waist of the ship. Did you hear, my people? Do any of you know of such a chest? If so, please bring it forth now. Not for my sake, of course, but for that of our benefactor, Captain Kennet. Let us show him we know how to be kind to those who are kind to us. It was so transparent, Wintrow thought Etta would cut him down where he stood. Instead, an oddly patient look came over her face. By his knee, on the deck, Kennet spoke very softly. She knows she can wait. She likes to take her time killing and do it in privacy. Wintrow's eyes snapped to the pirate, but he seemed to be nearly unconscious. His lashes lay long on his cheeks. His face was slack. A loose smile twitched over his mouth. Wintrow set two fingers lightly to Kennet's throat. His pulse still beat steady and strong there. But the man's skin was fevered. Captain Kennet? Wintrow asked softly. Is this it? A woman's voice rang out. The freed slaves parted, and she came striding forward. Wintrow stood up. She carried a medicine chest. The lid had been splintered, but he recognized its worn wood. He did not move forward, but let the woman bring it to Etta instead. Let this be her battle with Sardar. He had enough bad blood with the man already. She lowered her eyes to gaze down at the opened chest when it was placed before her feet. She did not even stoop to stir the dishevelled contents. When she lifted her eyes back to Sardar's face, she gave a small snort of contempt. I do not enjoy games, she said very softly, but if I am forced to play them, I always make sure I win. Her stare met his. Neither looked aside. The planes of her cheeks tightened, exposing her teeth in a snarling smile. Now, take your rabble off this deck, get below decks, and close the hatches. I neither wish to see you, nor hear you, nor even smell you while this is going on. If you are very wise, you will never draw my attention to you again. Do you understand? Wintrow watched as Sardar made a very serious mistake. He drew himself up to his full height, not quite the match of Etta's. His voice was coolly amused. Am I to understand that you, and not Brig, are in command here? It would have been a deft play if there had been any rivalry between the two to exploit. Brig only threw his head back in a guffaw of laughter as Etta's knife danced in to add yet another strike to Sardar's chest. This time he cried out and staggered back a step. She had made the knife bite deeper. As the wandering priest clutched at his blood-slicked chest, she smiled darkly. I think we understand that I am in command of you. One of the map faces started forward, his face dark with fury. Etta's knife moved in and out of him, and he went down, clutching at his belly. Vivacia gave a muffled cry at this new spillage of blood on her deck, an echo of the cries and gasps of the watching freedfolk. Wintrow shared the deep shudder of horror that passed through the ship at this fresh violence, but he could not take his eyes away. Sardar shrank back behind his other bodyguard, but that burly man was also cowering away from the woman with the knife. None of the others sprang forward to defend the priest. Instead, there was a subtle movement away from him as folk distanced themselves. "Be clear on this," Ethel's voice rang out like a hammer on an anvil. She lifted the bloody knife and swept in an arc that encompassed the whole ship and every staring face, tattooed or not. "I would tolerate no one who threatens the well-being and comfort of Captain Kennett. If you wish to avoid my wrath, then you will do nothing to inconvenience him." Her voice grew softer. "It is very simple, really. Now clear these decks." This time the crowd of folk on the deck disappeared like water swirling down a drain. In a matter of moments, the only people remaining above deck were the pirate crewmen and those few slaves Etta had chosen to hold Kennett down. Her chosen ones regarded her with an odd mixture of respect and horror. Wintrow suspected they had now completely changed allegiance and would follow her anywhere. It remained to be seen how formidable an enemy she had created in Sardar. As Etta came to Wintrow, their eyes met. The demonstration with Sardar had been for his benefit as well. If Kennett died under his hands, Etta's vengeance would be furious if not swift. He drew a deep breath as she approached him, the medicine chest in her hands. He took it from her wordlessly and placed it on the deck and swiftly sorted through its contents. Some of it had been pilfered, but most of it was there. With a deep sigh of relief, he found quasi-rind, preserved in brandy. The bottle was tiny. He reflected bitterly that his father had not seen fit to use it to ease his pain when his finger was amputated. Then the thought intruded that if he had, Wintrow would not have it now to use on Kennett. He shrugged at the vagaries of fate and began methodically to set out his tools. He pushed aside his collection of kitchen knives, replacing them with the finer-edged blades in the chest. He selected a bone saw with a carved handle like a bow. 3 needles he threaded with hair from Kennett's own head. When he laid them down on the canvas, the black hair spiraled into a lax curl. There was a leather strap with 2 rings on the end to cinch about the limb before he cut it. That was all. He looked a moment longer at the row of tools, then he glanced up at Etta. "I would like to offer prayers. A few moments of meditation might better prepare all of us for this." "Just get on with it," she ordered him harshly. The line of her mouth was set flat, and the high planes of her cheek were rigid. "Hold him down," Wintrow replied. His own voice came out as harshly. He wondered if he were as pale as she was. A spark of anger burned inside him at her disdain. He tried to rekindle it as determination. Etta knelt by Kennett's head, but did not touch him. 2 men took his good leg and pinned it to the deck. There was another man on each of his arms. Brig tried to hold Kennett's head, but his captain twisted free of his tentative grip. He lifted his head to glare wide-eyed at Wintrow. "Is it now?" he demanded, sounding both querulous and angry. "Is it now?" "It's now," Wintrow told him. "Brace yourself." To Brig he said, "Hold his head firmly. Put your palms on his forehead and pin him to the deck with your weight. The less he thrashes about, the better." Of his own accord, Kennett lay his head back and closed his eyes. Wintrow lifted the blanket that had covered his stump. In the few hours since he had last seen it had become worse. Swelling stretched the skin tight and shiny. His flesh had a blue-grey cast to it. Begin now, while he had courage still. He tried not to think that his own life depended on his success. As he gingerly worked the strap under the leg stump, he refused to think of Kennett's pain. He must focus on being swift and cutting him cleanly. His pain was irrelevant. The last time Wintrow had seen a limb severed from a man, the room had been warm and cheery. Candles and incense burned, as Sar Parte had prepared for his task, with a prayer and chanting. The only prayer uttered here was Wintrow's silent one. It flowed in and out with his breath. "Sar, grant your mercy, lend me your strength." Mercy, on an indrawn breath, strength, as he breathed out. It calmed his thundering heart. His mind was suddenly clearer, his vision keener. It took him a moment to realize Vivacia was with him more intimately than ever before. Dimly, he could sense Kenneth through her. Curiously, Winter explored that faint bond. It seemed as if she spoke to Kenneth at a great distance, counselling him to courage and strength, promising that she would be there to help. Winter felt a moment of jealousy. He lost his concentration. Mercy, strength, the ship prompted him. Mercy, strength, he breathed back at her. He threaded the leather strap through the rings and cinched it firmly about Kenneth's thigh. Kenneth roared out his agony. Despite the men pinning his limbs, his back arched up. Off the deck, he flopped like a gaffed fish. I'm wondering if that's a type of a gutted. Fluids broke through the crusted scabs on his stump and spattered on the deck. The foul odour poisoned the breeze. Etta threw herself across Kenneth's chest to a cry and strove to hold him down. A moment of terrible silence fell when he ran out of breath. "Cut him, damn you!" Etta shrieked at Winter. "Get it over with, do it!" Winter was frozen as he knelt, paralysed by Kenneth's agony. It inundated him like an icy wave, shocking and immersing him in its intensity. The force of the other man's experience flooded through his tenuous link with the ship and into Winter. He lost his identity in it. He could only stare dumbly at the whore, wondering why she was doing this to him. Kenneth drew in a ragged breath and expelled it as a scream. Winter shattered like a cold glass filled with hot water. He was no one, he was nothing, and then he was Vivacia and abruptly Winter again. He fell forward, his palms flattening on the deck, soaking up his identity from the wood. A Vestrit. He was a Vestrit. Moreover, he was Winter of Vestrit, the boy who should have been a priest. With a shudder, Kenneth suddenly lay senseless. In the stillness that followed, Winter grasped at his sense of himself, wrapped himself in it. Somewhere the prayer continued. Mercy, strength, mercy, strength. It was Vivacia setting the rhythm of his breath for him. He took control of himself. Etta was weeping and cursing at the same time. She sprawled on Kenneth's chest, both restraining and embracing him. Winter ignored her. "Hold him," he said tightly. He chose a knife at random. He suddenly understood what he had to do. Speed. Speed was the essence. Pain such as this could kill a man. If he was lucky, he could finish cutting before Kenneth recovered consciousness. He set the shining blade to the swollen flesh and drew it across and down. Nothing had ever prepared him for that sensation. He had helped with butchering at slaughter time at the monastery. It was not a pleasant task, but it had to be done. Then he had cut through cold meat that was still, that was solid and stiff from a day's hanging. Kenneth's flesh was alive. Its fevered softness gave way to the keen edge of the blade and closed up behind it. Blood welled up to hide his work. He had to grasp Kenneth's leg below the spot where he cut. The flesh there was hot, and his fingers sank into it far too easily. He tried to cut swiftly. The meat under the knife moved, muscles twitching and pulling back as Winter severed them. The blood poured forth in a constant crimson flood. In an instant, the handle of the knife was both sticky and slick. It puddled on the deck beneath Kenneth's leg, then spread to soak into Winter's robe. He caught glimpses of tendon, glistening white bands that vanished as his knife divided them. It seemed forever before his blade met the bone and was defeated by it. He flung the knife down, wiped his hand down his shirt, and cried, "Saw!" Someone thrust it towards him, and he grabbed it. To reinsert it into the wound sickened him, but he did it. He dragged it across the bone. It made a terrible sound, a wet grinding. Kenneth surged back to life, yelping like a dog. He pounded the back of his own head on the deck, and his torso writhed despite the weight of those holding him down. Winter braced himself, expecting to be overwhelmed with the pirate's pain, but Vivacia held it back. He had no time to wonder what it cost her to take that to herself. He did not even have time to be grateful. He bore down in the saw, working swiftly and violently. Blood spattered the deck, his hands and his chest. He tasted it. The bone gave away suddenly. Before he could stop, he had sawed raggedly into flesh. He pulled the saw out of the clinging wound and threw it aside, and then groped for a fresh knife. Somewhere Kenneth barked. Ah, ah, ah. It was a sound beyond screaming. A splattering noise followed. Winter smelled the sourness of vomit on the sea air. "Don't let him choke," he said abruptly, but it was not Kenneth who had puked, but one of the men holding him. No time for that. "Hold him down, damn you!" Winter heard himself curse the man. With a knife in his hand, he cut down, stopping just short of severing the leg completely. He turned the blade at an angle, slicing himself a flap of skin from the stump before he made the final severing cut and rolled the rotten remains of the leg aside. He looked down, sickened at what he had wrought. This was not a neatly sliced piece of meat like a holiday roast. This was living flesh. Freed of their attachments, the bundled muscles sagged and contracted unevenly. The bone glistened up at him like an accusing eye. Everywhere was a spreading blood. He knew with vast certainty that he had killed the man. "Do not think that," Rachel warned him, then always pleading to not force him to believe that, for right now, linked as we all are, he must believe what we think. He has no choice. With blood-smeared hands, he found a small bottle that held the quasi-fruit rind. He had heard of its potency, but it seemed like a pitifully small amount to stop such vast pain. He unstoppered it. He tried to pour it sparingly to save some against tomorrow's pain. The pieces of preserved rind clogged in the bottleneck. He shook it, and the pale green liquid splattered forth unevenly. Where it fell on Kenneth's flesh, it brought a sudden silencing of the pain. He knew because through Vivacia he sensed it. Less than half of the extract was left in the bloody bottle when he capped it. He clenched his teeth and touched the flesh he had cut, patting the thick green liquid to spread it evenly. The cessation of pain was so sudden that it was like being stranded by a retreating wave. He had not realized how much of it was battering past Vivacia's shield until it stopped. He sensed, too, Vivacia's sudden relief. He tried to remember all that he had seen Charparte do when he had cut off the man's leg. He had tied the ends of some bleeding arteries, folding them back on themselves and closing them off. Wintrow tried. He was suddenly tired and confused. He could not remember how many the healing priest had sewn. All he wanted to do was get away from this gory mess he had created. He longed to flee, curl up in a ball somewhere and deny this. He forced himself to go on. He folded the slab of skin up over the raw end of Kenneth's stump. He had to ask Etta to pull more hair from the pirate's head and thread the fine needles for him. Kenneth lay absolutely still now, his breath puffing in and out of his lips. When the men started to ease up their holds, Wintrow rebuked them. "Hold him fast still. If he stirs while I'm stitching, he may tear all my work apart." The flap did not fit neatly. Wintrow did the best he could, stretching the skin where he had to. He wrapped the stump with lint and bound it with silk. As fast as he hid it, the blood seeped through, smearing from his sticky hands, oozing out to blossom through the fabric. Wintrow lost count of how many layers he wrapped it in. When he was finally finished, he wiped his hands down the front of his robe yet again, and then reached for the cinch. When he loosened it, the clean bandaging almost instantly reddened. Wintrow wanted to scream in horror and frustration. How could there be that much blood in a man? How could so much of it gush out of him and yet leave him still clinging to life's thread? His own heart was thundering with fear as he wrapped it once again. Supporting the stump in his hands, he said dully, "I'm finished. We can move him now." Etta lifted her head from Kenneth's chest. Her face was white. Her eyes fell on the discarded leg. Heartbreak contorted her mouth for an instant. With visible effort, she smoothed her features. Her eyes were still bright with brimming tears as she huskily ordered the men, "Fetch his litter." It was an awkward trip. He had to maneuver down the short ladder to the main deck. Once they had crossed it, there were the narrow corridors of the officers' living quarters to navigate. Every time the wooden handles of the litter rapped against the wall and jostled Kenneth, Etta snarled. As they moved him from his litter to the bed, his eyes opened momentarily, and Kenneth babbled wildly, "Please, please, I'll be good. I promise. I'll listen and obey. I will." Etta scowled so blackly that every man lowered his eyes before her. Winter was sure the captain would never be questioned about his words. Once on his bed, Kenneth closed his eyes and was as still as before. The other men left the cabin as swiftly as they could. Wintrow lingered a moment longer. Etta scowled at him as he touched Kenneth, first at wrist and then throat. His pulse was light and flighty. Wintrow leaned close to him and tried to breathe confidence into him. He set his sticky hands on Kenneth's face, with his fingertips touching the man's temples, and prayed aloud to Sa to grant the man strength and health. Etta ignored him, folding a clean cloth and slipping it deftly under Kenneth's bandaged stump. "Now what?" she asked dully. When Winthrop finished, "Now we wait and pray," the boy replied. "That's all we can do." She made a small contemptuous sound and pointed at the door. Winthrop left. Her deck was a mess. The blood soaking into it made a heavy place. Vivacious eyes were half closed against the brightening of the westering sun. She could feel Kenneth breathing in the captain's cabin and knew the slow leaking of his blood. The medicine had drowned his pain, but it remained for her a distant throbbing threat. Every beat brought it a minuscule step closer. Although she could not feel his agony yet, she sensed its immensity and dreaded its coming. Winthrop moved on her foredeck, tidying up the mess. He damped the leftover piece of bandaging in his bucket of water. He wiped each knife as he put it away, cleaning the needles and the saw carefully. He stowed it all in the medicine chest, methodically returning it to order. He had washed his hands and forearms and wiped the blood from his face, but the front of his robe was stiff and soaked with it. He wiped clean the bottle of quasi-fruit essence and considered what was left. "Not much," he muttered to her. "Well, it matters little. I doubt that Kenneth will live long enough to require more. Just look at all this blood." He placed the bottle back in the chest and then looked down at his piece of leg. Gritting his teeth, he picked up the thing. Severed meat at both ends and a knee in the middle. It balanced oddly light in his hands. He carried it to the side of the ship. "It feels wrong," he said aloud to Vivacia, but he still threw it over the side. He staggered back with a low cry as a white serpent's head shot out of the water to snatch the leg out of the air before it could even splash into the sea. As swiftly as it had appeared, it was gone, and the leg with it. Winthrop darted back to the rail. He clung there, staring down into the green depths, looking for some pale flicker of the creature. "How did it know?" Winthrop demanded hoarsely. "It was waiting. It seized the leg before it touched the water. How could it have known?" Before she could answer, he went on. "I thought that serpent was gone, driven away. What does it want? Why did it follow us?" "It hears us, we two." Vivacia's voice was low-pitched for him alone. She felt ashamed. People had started to come out of the hatches back up onto the deck, but no one ventured near the foredeck. The serpent had come and gone so swiftly and noiselessly that no one else seemed to have seen it. "I do not know how, and I do not think understand in full what we think, but it understands enough. As to what it wants, why, exactly what you just gave it. It wants to be fed, no more than that. Maybe I should fling myself to it, save Etta the trouble of doing it later." He spoke mockingly, but she heard the despair under his words. "You voice its thoughts, not your own. It reaches for you, clamouring for food. It believes we owe it food. It does not scruple to suggest your own flesh might satisfy it. Do not listen." "How do you know what it thinks and wants?" Winthrop had abandoned his tasks and come to the rail, leaning over to speak to the figurehead. She glanced over her shoulder at him. The weariness on his face aged him. She debated how much to tell him and then decided there was no point in sheltering him. Eventually he must know. "He is family," she said simply. At Winthrop's astounded look, she shrugged one bare shoulder at him. "That is how it feels to me. I get the same sense of connection, not as strong as you and I have now, but undeniable." "That makes no sense." She shrugged at him again, and then changed the subject abruptly. "You must stop believing that Kenneth is certain to die." "Why? Are you going to tell me that he is family also and can sense my thoughts?" There was an edge of bitterness in his voice. Jealousy? She tried not to be pleased about it, but could not resist prickling him more. "Your thoughts? No, he does not sense your thoughts. It is I who he senses. He reaches towards me and I towards him. We are aware of each other. Tenuously, of course. I have not known him long enough to make it stronger. His blood soaking into my deck seals that bond in a way I cannot explain. Blood is memory. As your thoughts touch mine, so they also influence Kenneth's. I try to keep your fears from intruding on him, but it is an effort." You are linked to him? Winter asked slowly. You asked me to help him. You asked me to lend him strength. Did you think I could do that without bonding to him? Winter felt indignant at his disapproval. I suppose I didn't think about that aspect of it, Winter replied reluctantly. Do you sense him now? Vivacia thought about it. She found herself smiling softly. Yes, I do. And more clearly than I did before. The smile faded from her face. Perhaps that is because he is weakening. I think he no longer has the strength to hold himself separate from me. She brought her attention back swiftly to Winter. Your conviction that he will die is like a curse upon him. Somehow you must change your heart and think only of him living. His body listens deeply to his mind. Lend it your strength. I will try, he said grudgingly. But I can scarcely convince myself of something I know is a lie. Wintro, she rebuked him. Oh well. He set both hands to the forward rail. He lifted his eyes and fixed them on the horizon. The spring day was melting into twilight. The blue sky was darkening, its colour changing gradually to meld with the darker blue of the sea. In moments it was difficult to tell where the sea left off and the sky began. Wintro withdrew into himself, calling his vision back from that far focus until his eyes closed of their own accord. His breathing was deep and even, almost peaceful. In curiosity, she reached for the bond they shared, trying to read his thoughts and feelings without being intrusive. It did not work. He was instantly aware of her, yet instead of being resentful of her invasion, he linked willingly with her. Inside him, she became aware of the steady flowing of his thoughts. Sa is in all life is in Sa. It was a simple affirmation, and she realized instantly he had chosen words he actually believed. He no longer focused on the health of Knit's body. Instead, he asserted that while Knit lived, the life within him was of Sa and shared Sa's eternity. No end, his words promised her. Life did not end. Afterthought, she found she shared his conviction. No final blackness to fear, no sudden stopping of being. Changes and mutations, yes, but those things went on with every breath. Changes were the essence of life. One should not dread change. She opened herself to Knit, shared this insight with him. Life went on. The loss of a leg was not an ending, only a course adjustment. While life pulsed in a man's heart, all possibilities existed. Kenneth did not need to fear. He could relax. It was going to be all right. He should rest now, just rest. She felt the warmth of his expanding gratitude. The tensed muscles of his face and his back eased. Kenneth took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He did not draw another one. That's the end of that chapter.